Welcome to part 4 of this tutorial on OrientDB. In this tutorial we'll take a look at how to create vertices and edges manually and also through server-side functions. Before we start, there are a couple of things. One is you probably want to have this model in front of you that shows what we're building, or the schema for what we're building. This model is in the tutorial blog text, so you might want to look at it there, or however you want to keep this in mind before we start. Another thing that I have to do before we start is I have to show you some configuration that I had to add to the server configuration of OrientDB, because I wanted to use some Graff functions within my server-side functions. Anyway, I had to set up a handler, and I'll show you how to do that first. You add handlers to OrientDB by changing a configuration file that you found underneath the config directory. You'll find a file in here called orientdb-server-config.xml. I'll just use Emacs to open it and show you where I've added this handler. So it's under handlers. I've added one XML fragment for adding an OGraph server handler. This does require a restart of the server. So save the file, restart the server, and you will have the same functions that I depend on in this tutorial. Well, let's go back to the OrientDB Studio and create some objects and relationship. So I'm going to create a vertex first called member, and I'm going to use this simple syntax: create vertex member set, and then the properties. So we had name, email, and password. Just use my credential here. Don't try the password though, because I will not reveal that. Anyway, we execute that, and we should now see that we have created a new member, and we should be able to browse it. Now notice the ID here is 1156. I'm going to need that later. We could click into it and change it through the browser here, set it to not so secret password. And if we now select star from member again, we should see that it has changed. Indeed, password has changed. So that's one way of creating a member. To show how the model works, we would have to also create an article. So I'm going to use the same syntax: create vertex, article, and so on. Now it's important to note here that this is actually case insensitive in this browser, although I like to write my keywords this way. I particularly like to use the capitalization of the type. So use the capital A and lowercase article. So anyway, let's finish this up. Set that to some story about OrientDB. Execute it. Notice it has the ID 1215. So now it's time to link the two objects. So I'm going to say that we have the edge authors from 1156, which was me, or as a member, to 1215, which is this new article. Then we'll execute that, and we should now see that we created an edge. And if we now go and say select from members again, we will find the author, or the member, which was me. But you notice now I have these out authors, which are outgoing edges. In other words, the articles that I authored, and I can click through that. But you can also, from the article, go and find who authored it, right? So this is a typical Graff scenario. We have members, we have articles, and they're linked together. Now I could go on and create more members and more articles and linking them together, but you probably notice that this is fairly cumbersome. I create the vertices one by one, I create the links one by one, and I want to show you a couple of tricks. I want to show you this concept of functions. So before we move on, or instead of doing everything by hand here, I'm going to show you how I could help myself here by creating a set of functions. We'll start by going into the function section. You find that menu on top, and you hit the plus to create a new one, and now you can name the function. I'll give it a name, create some members. And I'll also pick a language. Here it currently supports JavaScript and SQL. They promise more languages later. So let's see what we want to do. We want to create a function that creates a set of members, so I don't have to do that one by one. And I need to take some parameters to that. I want to have some way of predictably creating some data. So I'm going to make some kind of prefix so I know which batch I created it, and I'm going to use n to say the number of members I want to create in a single batch. So I'll just call prefix and name prefix, and n the number of members I want to create. These comments are obviously optional, but it helps at least for this tutorial. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we'll have to create some kind of loop. We're in JavaScript now. You have to know JavaScript to understand what I'm doing here, but var I equals 0, I less than n, and I++. And in this loop, I'm going to create some members. And I'm going to use a JSON format for that here to make it a little easier. But let's first establish some variables. So the name would be, just say the prefix plus underscores plus I. And then let's make the email the name plus @scicebike.com. Finally, we should be able to just create a JSON structure here with the member data. You have to set up the class attribute if you're going to use the JSON structure, so it knows which type of object to validate or which schema to validate against. So that we call member. I'm going to give it the name, password. How about we just use the name? So the name and the password would be the same. And then email, we've already created, so we can assign that email very easily by just adding the email property. And that should complete the JSON structure. So just end of curly brace and semicolon here. And then we'll get the result. I'm going to use, I could use db here, but I'm going to use gdb as an implicit variable. .save and then the member data. And that's the end of the, I mean, we don't want to commit at every juncture, so I think I'll commit at the end of creation here. So I'll end the loop and then do a commit, which I'll have to do gdb commit. Okay, and that should complete the function. I'll just return the number of objects. Hopefully we succeeded here. I should have a little more failure and try catch blocks here, but just for simplicity I'm just going to use it as this. And then I'm going to create or try it out. And you can try it out underneath. Going to use as prefix test, and then let's say we create 200 of them. I execute that, and you see I created 200 objects, at least in theory. Now here's a little got you. If I now do select star from member and I execute, you'll see that I only got 20 objects back. And this might surprise you. We created 200, right? Even if I set the limit here to 2000, it still only returns 200 objects. And the trick here is in the top right there. You'll see the content type and the limit set to 20. So by changing the limit, setting the limit to a higher limit anyway, we would be able to see all the objects we created. So for instance, if I now go and set the limit to 2000 and I execute the same query, you'll find that we have all of them. So all of them we inserted in the database. We just had a limit for the number of objects that we wanted to return back from this browse screen. And I should be able to see select star from member where name like test and percentage being the wildcard, and we'll see that we got back exactly 200 of them. And I could check that again by deleting all of them, and we'll see we deleted 200. So anyway, so that's a little got you. Well, that was a simple function. We're actually used JSON and some document feature to create members. The next function I'll show you is a lot more tricky. That's to create articles. And to create an article, we may have to we have to create an article, we have to link the article to its author, and if the article was in response to some other article, we have to link to that article also. So that's a lot more tricky, and this is why I had to add that handler that you saw in the beginning of this tutorial to make this work. But anyway, I'll write such a function, and then we'll see if it works. We'll start by creating the function. Call this function create article, and select language as JavaScript. Now the next step, I'm going to use an implicit variable called orient and get the Graff API. This is why I did the configuration in the very beginning. So just grab the Graff API by doing orient.getGraff, and then I'm going to construct the current time, which we have to use the Java typing system for. So, and then next I'm going to create the article itself. This is basically, there's a function on this API called add-vertex, and the parameters are a little cryptic here. So the first parameter should be the class, and it has to be passed as a string with class : first. And the next is an array of name and values, alternate name and values. The title, then we're going to pass the content, which its value, and then of course the publishing date with now. And for that to work, obviously we need to get those parameters, at least the title and the content. So let's create some parameters to this function. Let's start with author, and that would be of course the author of the article. Next, let's create title, and then content. And if this is in reply to some other article, we need to know the source article too. So let's add that as a parameter too. Okay, now we should have all the parameters we need, and let's continue. And oops, it looks like I have a parenthesis error here. Let me fix that real quick. Yeah, it doesn't. I didn't close the add vertex. So with that, let's continue. So after I've created the article, I need to construct an edge. And the first thing I'm going to do is to create a string that represents the command I want to execute. This is identical to the way we did it in the browse, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Just notice that I'm constructing the ID here by concatenating strings. The next thing is to execute this command or this string, and there is a function on the Graff API toward command where you have to pass in the language that you're using and the command, and then the parameters. Next, I'll check if there was a source article or if this was in reply to something else. I'll reuse the C variable here to create another command, same way as before. Now this edge is called replies, and from the source article and to the newly created article. So that should be straightforward, and all we have to do is execute that also. So set language to SQL, the command, and then the empty array. The empty array is probably for future support of prepared statement. OrientDB doesn't support that for this particular command right now. Let's commit it and then return the article, and that should be complete. Let me go through this one more time by just commenting up the code here. So the first thing was to grab the Graff API. Orient is an implicit variable. Get Graff gives you back the Graff API, but this only works if you do the change to the configuration, adding the handler as I showed you in the beginning. I'm getting the current time. I'm using Java typing here, which may be a little awkward for JavaScript programmers. The next thing is I'm adding the actual article, creating the article. Little awkward again here, the parameters aren't that easy to understand, but first parameter is the class and then the properties. And then I create a string basically that contains the command, where I want to create an edge that defines the link from the author to the article. And yeah, it's just a string here. It's similar to what we did when we were browsing and doing this thing manually. And then of course we need to execute the command. First parameter being the language, second parameter being the command itself, and as I said, the third is right now an empty array, but I'm sure that is for future prepare statements. And if we had a source article, or if this was in reply to something else, we would have to create the edge from the article, the original article, to the new article. Again, I'm reusing, see here, reusing the command. I'm usually creating these strings so I could do a little better debugging. But anyway, we construct the command to create the edge for replies and then execute the command. And then really all that is left after that is to commit and return the article. So that's should be fairly straightforward. Now there is a very high likelihood that I mess something up here, so I'm sure there is an error or so, but I'm doing this really quick to see if I can induce those errors and show you how you can sort of find those errors in here. And I should probably have put in some try-catch blocks and done this a little more carefully, but for now, for this tutorial, this is good enough, I think. It was based on IDs, and I don't remember the IDs, so I'm going to go back to the browse area, or the browse the SQL interactive SQL commands, and figure out what my IDs were. So select start from member. I see that I'm 1156. Select from article. I see that the article that I put in there was 11 or 1215. Okay, this is just so I remember what the IDs are. So now we can go back to the functions and try to execute the functions themselves. And it's very likely that I've done something wrong here, but hopefully we can fix it on the fly. So let's put in the parameter. First one was author, and I was 1156, and the next one is the title. So let's give it some name, maybe I don't know, tutorial on distributed Scrum. It doesn't really matter. Some title, and then some content. And you probably see that I will go to XXX, YYY, or ABCDEF later, at least if I have errors. And I do. So when I executed this, I get some error message back. And now it's time to study this. And usually in the returning text, I can find out which line I have an issue on. And then you can see here, I have an issue on the line g.addVertex. So let's see, what did I do there? Oh, it looks like I forgot to put the comma in when published, and I should have put something in there. Let's save it, execute again, and well, let's give it 1156. It doesn't, when you save it, it loses its parameters. So and that might be a good thing actually. And distributed Scrum and some content. Execute again. Oops, looks like I didn't quite fix it. I have an error on the same line, and I see it. Oh, I used colon instead of comma. Unbelievable. Anyway, let's fix that. Let's change the when. You see on when published, I was must have been in JSON land. Anyway, so let's save it again and try again. 11:56, and at this point I'm getting tired of trying to type something sensible, so I'll probably use A, B, C, D, E, F and execute, and I still have an error. And let's see, what is it this time? See, that's 27. Create edge author percentage to. Oh, I see it. Okay, so I messed up the start and end string here. So this is one of my common mistakes here. So create author, well, use double quotes. I should decide whether I use double quote or single quotes. Both are supported. I happen to start it with double quote and end it with single quote. Anyway, let's try it one more time after I fix that. 11:56. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, execute, and oops, that looks like it actually worked. Now, the blue section at the bottom here didn't refresh, so I'm just going to go back and make sure. Select start from article, and yes, I have the A, B, C, E, D, E, F, and it has the correct publishing date. And as I browse or traverse the graph, I can go into the author. I can see that I have 2 articles, and that looks great. Seems like we got it all to work. We need to test that the source article feature also work. So before I do that, let me create a an article. I'm just need. Okay, this is 12:15. Just remember the ID. Let's create another member. Let's create a member called John, and let's have him post an article that is in reply to the OrientDB tutorial. So just same thing as we've seen before. Just setting the parameters, and oh, it looks like I did the same silly mistake with with the quotes again. Anyway, I guess we could give it password too. I think password is optional, but I'll just give him all the properties. So execute that, and he has ID 11257, which is fine. Just put a note on that so I don't forget it, and let's go back to the functions and try to execute the function where we create an article produced by John and in reply to the article on OrientDB. So go to the create article, go down to the parameters. So the source here is 257, which was John, 11257. Give it some title and some content. So title could be fix some X, and you should not use X, whatever. And then the source article, and the source article here is basically the article that I created, and if you remember, that was 12:15. I execute that, it looks good. Now the question is, did we actually succeed? The only way to check that is to go back to the browse. So I'll select start from member, perhaps, see if I can navigate to everything. So what if I pick up John? I see that he has authored an article. This article looks good. It is in reply to this other article, and that's the OrientDB tutorial, and it looks like our graph is exactly what we expected it to be. Just to make sure that we're on the same page, let me see if I can draw a picture that shows you what we just did. Let's assume that we already have the 2 members, Peter and John. So these 2 vertices. And the first thing I did was to create an article. This was the OrientDB tutorial, and there was no source there. This was an original article, so that's linked only to Peter. So we'll have a situation like this. Next, what I did was that I created another article. This article was published by John, therefore we have this author link, but it was in reply to this other article that was created by me on the OrientDB tutorial. So now we'll see the complete graph as we believe it's been stored in the database. Because I decided to use functions, there are a couple of other features that would be useful to cover. It is possible to use functions you created directly from SQL. So I could, for instance, invoke the create article function simply from here by doing something like select create article and then pass in the parameters, which I think was something like 1156, and then maybe I'm thanking the previous guy from posting, so thanks, good suggestions, and then 1217 I think was the response article. Anyway, I believe this is correct. We'll see. So if I execute this, I'm basically executing a function directly from SQL. So if I do select star from article here, let's make sure it worked. And there's the thanks and good suggestion, and it is in response to 1217, which is this one. So that's another way of invoking functions. Now let me show you a final way to do this. What I could do is actually I could go after this function or invoke this function using REST. So under the prefix function and the name of the database, which is articles, I can actually go after the function here. So the function was called create article, and my parameters would be, the first parameter was 1156, which was me. Just do title content here so we can see it, and then let's say I'm responding to 1217 again. So this would work, except in this case this function happens to be non-idempotent, so that means we're not guaranteeing that we're not changing the database. So my guess is here it's going to complain because by default the browser would do a GET request, and that's exactly what it's saying. It's saying that I need to use post instead. Now I could go to curl or do something like that, but that's a little painful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use EasyRest. EasyRest is basically a little plugin to Chrome that is you can search on in Chrome, and it would allow you to invoke REST services a little easier. So if you download and install REST Easy, you should be able to just launch the application, and I'll just paste in the URL we tried. But now I have the option here to change it to a post and so on. And if I execute this, just sending this, we should see a result at the bottom here, and we see the result, which is the JSON string that was what we returned from the function. So everything works fine, and if I did everything correctly now, if we go back to the browse and do select star from article, we should now see this this new article that I created, right? So that's another way of invoking it. So OrientDB has the ability to expose the functions through REST APIs. That concludes the tutorial on how to instantiate data in OrientDB based on the schema that we created ourselves. We did it manually using the SQL interpreter. We also created some functions. It's a little longer than I wanted to, this tutorial, and I didn't get to show everything that I wanted to either. Hopefully I can come back to some of the other things that would be useful to talk about here. How to use other languages, maybe how to connect from Node.js, from Java. But we're already over 25 minutes here, and that's about as long as anyone can listen to me, I think. So with that, thanks for watching, and please leave comments.